actually how to validate code. I'd like to talk about the pros and the cons of validating code, and I suggest later on in the video an article that you read concerning the issues, the pros and cons, and the whole perspectives on validating code. But keep in mind, I guess the way that I view it is that when you code in most other languages, you have the compiler, you have other means by which to tell if your code is correct or not. And you get it validated by the process of actually compiling your code or interpreting your code. When you do HTML, the browser doesn't really do that kind of validation. So it's just good practice as a professional coder, programmer, web developer to validate one's code and to want one's code to comply to the W3C standards in web development. So if you look, there are three very big pros in validating your code. First of all, it does help with cross-browser, cross-platform, and future compatibility. It does not guarantee cross-browser, cross-platform, and future compatibility, but it does help move that way. And so that's a very good reason to to validate your code. Also, search engine visibility. Some search engines look at code in a way that if it is valid code, your website will tend to bubble, or your web page will tend to bubble up to the top of search engines as opposed not to. So that's another reason to validate one's code. And the third reason, which I think is probably the most important, is it's just professionalism. When a website is poorly coded, it reflects poorly on the developer, uh, and it affects the marketability of not only your skills but also of the web pages, websites that you create. So, just from a standpoint of wanting to do it the right way and be professional about it, that's another reason to validate one's code. Now, there are cons against validating code. One of them is that it does not guarantee that your page is going to work, and that is true. But once again, it does at least lead you into the right direction of your page working cross-browser, cross-platform, and in the future. Also, and this is, I feel, the most valid con is are the time constraints to convert. If you already have a website up there and it's got a lot of pages in it, the time that it takes to go back and validate those pages and make sure they're validated, reintegrate the website, that might prove to be non-profitable for that particular website. So I can see that there sort of middle of the road solutions to that, which would be to leave your existing web pages in that site the way they are, and then validate and put a lot of documentation in newer ones, as to point out the need for validation of the older ones when there is time and or resources to do so. Uh, the third con that people cite about validating code is that the average visitor doesn't care. Well, to me, that's not a good con, because once again, the developer should care in terms of professionalism about validating one's code. So there's an article, like I said, that I will allude to at the end of the video that goes into more depth in this, but I think it's worthwhile reading. But those are some general issues around validating code. So now what I'm going to show you is how to validate code, and there are a lot of different code validators out there. I'm going to use one that I've used that I think is pretty good and would really suit the needs of this class. So what I've done is I've created a very simple web page here that actually does not validate in a couple of places. And actually, this is the basic template that I've been using for all the web pages in the videos that I've shown thus far, and they've had some validation flaws. And so using this now to correct those flaws, to show you how the validator could help correct these flaws. So this is the web page. It's only 12 lines of code, and then when you show it in the browser, it looks like this, and it has the click to validator. And so the actual validator is on the website validator.w3.org. And so when you click this, it brings up the validator. Um, and so as you can see, there are three tabs here. One, you can validate by putting in the URL, the URI of the website. The other you can validate by uploading a local file to the validator and having it do it that way. And the third one is you could just copy and paste your HTML code or your code that you want validated in there. So those are the three different ways you can do it. Each one of these selections allows you to choose more options. So you can choose the type of character encoding, the document type, which are two issues that we're going to talk about. That actually those are two issues that prevent the code that we're getting ready to validate from validating. We get a couple of warnings from that. And then you can talk about the output. Do you list your output sequentially, or do you group error messages by type? Do you want it to show the source, to show an outline, to show you how to clean up your HTML with this thing called tidy, and then give you error pages and give you verbose output that will give you a lot more description as to what your warning or errors are. So I'm going to do this three ways. I'm going to validate this code three ways. The first way, I'm going to show you how to do it with the URL. I've actually uploaded this page to my Prism web account, and so I'm just going to go here and copy and paste that URL. I want to copy and paste that URL into the validator here, and I'm just going to click all these options so that we can see what they all look like. I'm going to leave character encoding and document type to detect automatically, and that's to display the fact that there are a couple of things in HTML that need to be there. So I hit check, and it will spin and whir for a minute, and then it shows that I have two errors and two warnings, and it gives me a timestamp and all that information. Then when you scroll down, it says the big error is, or warning is, unable to detect parse mode. In other words, it doesn't know the type of document, and it's because I didn't put enough information in the document type tag, which is needed, which is the needed and mandatory for the browser to determine the document type, and you need to be very explicit about that. Um, as I showed on the first day of class, the document type declaration is much different for HTML5 than it is for previous versions of HTML. In fact, let me go and show you that here now. If you look at the document type, and this comes off of the W3 Schools tutorials. If you look at the document type here, this is the document type declaration for HTML. If you contrast that with the document type declaration for prior versions of HTML, excuse me, this is HTML5 here. For prior versions, as you can see, you've got to give it a lot more information, and that's because prior versions of HTML were based on SGML, the Standard Generalized Markup Language. HTML has done a lot to formalize a lot of the newer technologies on the web and gear them towards application development. So you no longer have to do all of this, and you don't have to give it a DTD, which is a document type definition, at least not in this way. So all of these prior document type definitions here, prior document type tags, you don't use, but you do need in HTML5, you do need to put in the HTML part, and that is why, if we go back here to the validation, that is why we're getting this error here, is because in our HTML, go back over here, you can see that we did not include that in our document type. So we're going to have to go back and correct that. Alright, so let's go back, let's continue down here, and it says the second part is that we have no character encoding. And once I make this correction for document type, then we'll come back and look at the character encoding. And then because of those errors, you see that we have some delimiter errors here and those kinds of things, but we'll get back to. It does give a listing of the source, and then it makes some suggestions here in the tidy part. It makes some suggestions as how to correct this. If you see here, one of the corrections is to include this into the document type, but it doesn't know that we're validating for HTML5. So let's go back up here and let's change our validation check, and let's say, because it assumed that we were doing HTML 4.01 transitional, let's say we're validating for HTML5, and it does say experimental because HTML5 is still relatively new. We'll change that to, we change this to HTML5. We go back down here to revalidate, and in HTML5 it does say it's tentatively checked, but it still gives us three warnings. It passed sort of tentatively, but we have three warnings here. First warning that we can't really get rid of right now is that it says that we are using experimental feature, which is HTML5, so it warns us of that. The other one is it tells us about the document type, and the third one is the character encoding. So it tells us we validate it, but by the same token, it does give us some suggestions here, or a suggestion here in terms of our document type. So we're going to go and change that in a second. All right, so let's go see what happens if we change the document type, as we should do for all of our HTML files. If we're doing HTML5, we're going to put in HTML into our document type there. So let's do that, and then let's save it here. Now, so I've shown you how to validate using the URL. Now I just made that change, but I made it locally. So let's go to my local file and choose the local file to do my validation, so I can illustrate how to do that. So it's really straightforward. You go and you choose local file, or choose file, and it spins and whirs and looks in your local directory. Let's see, change here to this directory, and I want to validate this particular file. So I've chosen that file locally. Once again, I can select my options. I'm going to validate on HTML5. I'm going to click all of my options here so I see all of the output, and I check it. And it says I tentatively passed with three warnings still. Says once again I have no character encoding, and those are my warnings. So the big thing now is it's telling me I have no character encoding, and let's go and find out why that is as well. Uh, Now, we talked about in the meta tags this thing about HTTP equivalence, and so prior to HTML5, the way you encoded a character was with the following meta tag, and I've copied and pasted this from another location on my computer. Uh, so if you look here, that's the meta tag that used to be used to deal with character encoding. With the advent of HTML5, the meta tag has gotten simpler, and they've created, actually, if you remember from the meta tag video, I talked about that in meta tag you had name and content, or HTTP equivalent and content. Well, there's another one that was introduced in HTML5, which is the Char Set, and this only works for HTML5. If you try to validate a previous version of HTML with this particular tag, or with this particular attribute, you'll get an error. So what I'm saying here is that I'm going to use the character set UTF-8. It's going to assume that it's an HTML document from above as far as the content type. So this is how you do this in HTML5. So if I save this and then choose my file again over here in the validator, and then revalidate it, it says now that I only have one warning. And the only warning I have now is that this is an experimental feature, and that's just what we're going to get. So now this is validated HTML5, and the code has been properly validated. And so this is how we have to change our basic template of HTML5 code. Is in the doc type, we need to put HTML, and then we need to include a meta tag in our header that has char set UTF-8, which that's the 8-bit Unicode character set, and it lets the browser know what character set we're using on this particular web page. And so doing that, we now have a validated web page here. So now, how do you indicate that? Well, there are ways to indicate this for our users. I've sort of created another web page over here, which, let me bring this up in the browser. This particular web page shows some typical images that are used. In the past, I'm sure you've seen these types of images on the bottom of pages, which indicate that the page has been validated or it uses W3C validation for HTML 4.01. Um, so with HTML5, strangely enough, a similar tag does not exist. They have this kind of tag, which brings up some interesting features. They have this general tag which indicates that it's HTML5 powered web page. If you look here, if you can tell by my mouse over this shield has badges off to the side, and this badge indicates that it's powered with semantics, which means that it's using HTML5 in its proper semantics context, which we've talked a lot about over the past videos. And then this one down here, we're also going to use. This one has additional badges which not only say that it's semantically validated, but it also says it complies with CSS3 standards. And so when we move to CSS, we'll actually be using this. And so these are images you can put on your website to indicate that you've gone through the additional process of validating your code. And so I have included on this web page links to the HTML, to the validation icons for versions validated prior to HTML5, and all those icons are down here, which you can link to easily if you wanted to do it for a version prior to HTML5. And then they have a very interesting website that builds these icons based on the attributes of HTML5 that you validated on. And so if you link there, this website I find to be quite interesting. Let me shrink it down a bit here so you can see it. It has a place in the middle where you can actually build your badge, and so you can add, and that's how I build these. I added semantics and CSS, and you can change the badge. As you see over here on the right, it changes the little badge. Up here it explains the icons for the badges, uh, and then once you build your badge, it has actually down here HTML that you can copy and paste in terms of the references and the images for the badge. I just copied the image locations for the badge, and you can make the badge vertical or horizontal if you wish. So that's and then what I do over here is this is the HTML that generated this page here. Uh, and then the last thing on this page is the article that I referred to earlier. Is a link to that article. That link is down here, and it's the link to the article that talks about should you validate your page or not. Read from this article the points that I pointed out earlier about the pros and cons against validation and for validation. So this ends the video on validation in HTML.